All right. Here we are again. For those uninitiated, a couple months ago, I released a video chronicling my first impressions of esteemed rapper Eminem's discography, which served as a sort of gateway into the genre of hip-hop for me. And the thing about gateways is that they're not very useful unless you actually cross through them. And thanks to the added encouragement I received from that video's comment section regarding other artists that I could potentially review, I finally decided to give the same treatment to Kendrick Lamar Duckworth, or Kendrick Lamar, as he's known on stage. Now, the reason I chose this artist is twofold. Number one, Kendrick Lamar is quite overtly considered to be one of the greatest rappers to ever do it, and you don't need to be a hip-hop fan to know that. The intellectual quality of his lyricism was something that my commenters were sure to highlight at every opportunity, so naturally, I was compelled to do a deep dive, especially when I heard that he's the only artist outside of classical or jazz to win a Pulitzer Prize. Number two, I figured I should explore a different generation of hip-hop in the interest of widening my perspective on the genre early on. Of course, Eminem was releasing music at the same time as Kendrick, but I think it's safe to say that the era he's generally associated with is the 1999 to 2002 range, whereas Kendrick Lamar took the world by storm in the 2010s. Well, maybe not the whole world. I personally spent the decade listening to Triumph and playing Luigi's Mansion. At any rate, I think it's about time we jump into this rabbit hole. Without further ado, welcome to my comprehensive review of Kendrick Lamar's 5-album catalog from the perspective of a former rap hater. Here we go. Our journey begins in 2011 with Kendrick's debut studio release, Section 80. And right off the bat, I got a striking sense of his unique vocal timbre. It's kind of nasally, but also breathy at the same time. I dig it. The first track is called Fuck Your Ethnicity, and I really appreciate the colorblind mindset that the song advocates for. We're introduced to the characters Keisha and Tammy in the opening monologue, and when Kendrick comes in with the verse, you're immediately met with a high level of lyrical proficiency through wordplay and multi-entendres that impressively persist throughout the album. Now, I mentioned in my Eminem video that the reason I tended to shy away from hip-hop is because it typically prioritizes musical components other than melody and harmony, which are the two aspects of music that I personally value the most. However, I found that the harmonies used in the chord progression of this song, the following track Hole Up, and Ab-Soul's outro include various tertian extensions that are very reminiscent of jazz. In fact, several of these songs include conventional jazz instrumentation. The two aforementioned tracks feature horns, Rigor Mortis features trumpets, and The Spiteful Chant has a whole brass section. And just like a true jazz song, the vocals and piano part in the opening track are dragging behind the beat almost enough to drag you halfway up the wall. The second track, Hole Up, has a great horn melody as well as some jazzy backup vocals to support it. And after hearing the incredible rhyme scheme in the third verse, I gotta say that I was enjoying myself much more than I expected to going into this. But just like the poet Robert Frost once said, if something's gold, if it's golden, then it has to leave at some point. It can't stay there forever. Something's got to give. I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but the third track is called ADHD, and it exhibits two of my least favorite characteristics of modern hip-hop: lo-fi instrumentals and trap beat percussion. I don't know why, but these timbres just don't appeal to my taste at best, and at worst, they're honestly like nails on a chalkboard sometimes. And they're also seemingly inescapable when you try to listen to any hip-hop album produced in the 21st century. To be fair, this isn't a problem unique to hip-hop, or contemporary music for that matter. Prince was famous for using shrill, thin-sounding drum machines, and I equally hated it in his music too. Anyway, from now on, I'm not going to mention whenever Kendrick's songs are lo-fi or use trap beats, but just know that it happens a lot, particularly in his last two albums, and it annoys me more than it should. The fourth and fifth tracks introduce what seems to be the titular concept of this record, which is the exploration of the vices, evils, and pains of the characters within it. This concept continues in the songs Ronald Reagan Era, Po Man's Dreams, Cushion Corinthians, and Keisha's Song, the last of which lyrically escalates in a poignantly harrowing way. The parallel modulation and no makeup makes for a brilliant chord progression, and Po Man's Dreams features a vibraphone-esque synthesizer that fills out the instrumentation quite nicely. I also noticed that Kendrick has a habit of declaring the name of the song after a particularly representative verse, almost as if it's a mic drop. Like at the end of Tammy's song, he gets through the last verse and the last chorus, and then he just says, "Tammy's song." It's like, yeah, we know, bud. This also happens in Keisha's song in High Power. I like the outro of Po Man's Dreams where GLC talks about exercising your ism. I just think that's a cool way to articulate encouragement to live by one's ideology. There are some really strange chord choices in the brass section at the beginning of the spiteful chant, but they actually grew on me as the song went on. And believe it or not, the trap beat kind of grew on me too because of the added reverb on them, which gave them a little more size in the mix. Schoolboy Q absolutely killed his verse, and the gradual layering of the arrangement left a really good taste in my mouth by the time the song ended. Chapter 10 starts with a peculiar non-uniform beat, but it's eventually justified by the incorporation of the repetitive triplets in Kendrick's flow.
Section 80. Show of hands, how many been taking notes? Good.
Speaking of Kendrick, I didn't notice this until Keisha's song, but he sometimes puts an H sound at the beginning of words that start with a vowel. This is actually a technique that's often used by classical choir musicians in order to emphasize the attack of a note and give it more rhythmic clarity. It's really cool to see a mainstream musician make use of it. He also showcases his formidable technical ability in the last verse of Rigor Mortis. The 13th track, Cushion Corinthians, has an extremely tasty bass part, and there's a really nice vocal melody near the end of the song that retroactively recontextualizes the chord progression. The kick drum in Absol's outro is few and far between, but its placement is very strategic and tasteful. And the bar where he says, "I'm not on the outside looking in, I'm not on the inside looking out, I'm in the dead center looking around," is pretty clever. The eventual callback to the monologue at the beginning of the album gave me an uncanny full circle feeling going into the final track, High Power, which also has a really solid drum part, not to mention the beginning where he says to put 3 fingers in the air like the Hunger Games. All in all, I actually enjoyed this album quite a bit, although it did have its fair share of flaws. I found Kendrick's vocal delivery to be rather monotone and static, and his flow honestly felt rhythmically homogeneous for most of it. The hooks weren't very memorable, and I have no patience for rappers taking themselves too seriously. My philosophy is that if you're gonna brag about yourself, make sure it's funny. I don't care about your body count or what kind of car you drive. With that being said, the jazzy style of this album's instrumentals, the way that the songs develop as they go on, and the commitment to the record's themes of drugs, racism, and political issues of his generation were significantly appealing to me. I'm going to try to give a flow trophy to one of the songs from each of these albums, as well as talk about what my favorite bar was. So for Section 80, the flow trophy goes to Cushion Corinthians, and the bar of the album is actually the first one that ever escapes Kendrick's mouth. Fire burning inside my eyes, this the music that saved my life. Y'all be calling it hip-hop, I be calling it hypnotize. Yeah, hypnotize. Trapped my body, but freed my mind. But I would like to give an honorable mention to Whoop-de-Whoop, Whoop-de-Whoop, Whoop, Whoop-de-Whoop from the 7th track Ronald Reagan era. One short year after his relatively successful premiere, Kendrick Lamar released his sophomore studio album, an autobiographical record by the name of Good Kid, Mad City. This album illustrates Kendrick's time growing up in Compton, California, and its cinematic nature largely contributed to its mass reverence by fans and critics alike. The movie-like quality of this record is exhibited almost immediately with the dialogue that bookends the opening track Shireen, aka Master Splinter's daughter. This song treats us to a nice bass guitar entrance, followed by a shifting minor progression whose chords are all borrowed from different keys, which makes it sound intriguingly alien. The weird percussion that eventually comes in almost sounds like someone smacking a kickball. The vocals in the second track left me a little conflicted. They're significantly behind the beat, and while this is a legitimate jazz technique that was also used on the last record, it frequently gets to be so late that it's a full eighth note behind where it intuitively should be, particularly during the chorus. There's also this interesting effect where Kendrick harmonizes with himself by explicitly singing the lyrics in one track and simply speaking them in the other. It gives his voice this sort of half-tonal quality, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. The strings in the outro cap off the song nicely, and I especially appreciated the bar where he says that even a small lighter can burn a bridge. We get even more strange-ass percussion in the next track, Backseat Freestyle, and the mix painfully exposes it in isolation this time around. The song goes into another skit, putting a spotlight on Kendrick's family, but I just found this track to be awful all around. The art of peer pressure includes the commonly used crackling that's meant to imitate the sound of a vinyl record, and I still hate it. But the major 7 piano chords are nice, and this song gives us probably the best lyrics on the album so far, especially with the line about speaking a language only he and his friends know, and others think it's an accent. The scenarios escalate throughout the song in a way that truly exemplifies Kendrick's storytelling prowess. The 5th track, Money Trees, is home to my all-time favorite Kendrick Lamar ad-lib in the form of My Tony Head, and this song together with the previous track make for an excellent Domino's commercial. The Drake feature in Poetic Justice is remarkably ironic given the recent events, but his verse wasn't actually that bad. The 7th and 8th tracks, Good Kid and Mad City, respectively, kick off side 2 of the album with some liberal compositional choices that I actually respect quite a lot. The chords and the beat of Good Kid have some really hip extensions, the most notably of which being the add 9 on minor tonic chords, as well as the minor major 7 chords dotted around. For anyone that's not a huge dork, a minor major 7 chord is just a minor chord with a leading tone stacked on top of it. It's often used in spy movies. Also, Kendrick cracks his voice in his delivery during Mad City, and honestly, I think it's pretty cool. I can see why some people don't like it, but I'll take this every day of the week over a boring monotone vocal delivery. It's a neat signature technique that he returns to every now and then in future projects, and I'm here for it, man. There's also an instrumental switch up halfway through the song, and the new beat seriously kicks ass. It's totally elevated by the strings and the drum part. Speaking of strings, the next song, Swimming Pools, makes pretty cool use of them. And I normally don't like repetitive triplet flows, but the one in the second verse is so fast that I'm honestly just impressed more than anything else. So kudos, I guess. But let me tell you, the next song is a doozy. Sing About Me, I'm Dying of Thirst has not one, but 2 skits in it. So you know it's something special. In all seriousness, the lyrics of this song do a great job capturing the desperation of its subjects through standout lines like hop in that water and pray that it works, the frantic repetition of I'll never fade away and then proceeding to literally fade away in the mix, and the memorable line sleep is the cousin of death, which I think is a Nas reference. That's another artist I've been listening to. It's been pretty awesome so far. Back on topic though, the gunshots interrupting the first verse going into the chorus is a really profound effect that kind of reminds me of that scene from Life is Beautiful. You know what I'm talking about if you've seen the movie. The 11th track is called Real, and one of the lines in this song is, I'm real, I'm real, I'm really, really real. This lyric is said a total of 13 times in the song, which is 12 and a half too many as far as I'm concerned. But the kick-ass beat in the final track, Compton, makes up for it, and Kendrick cleverly says that he's taking the van out for 15 minutes at the very end, which implies that you could just start the whole album again and drift into an endless cycle. When it comes to Kendrick's flow on this album, I have generally the same gripes as I did with Section 80, and although the instrumentals were a sizable step down from that record, the hooks were much more memorable this time around. I really appreciate Kendrick's attempt to make this the cinematic masterpiece that it could have been, but I felt that most of the skits and dialogue moments were just thrust in random places that didn't really gel with the music and made it sound rather disjointed. I'm going to give the Flow Trophy to Good Kid, and the bar of the album for me comes from the 6th track, Poetic Justice. If I told you that a flower bloomed in a dark room, would you trust it? Alright, let's see what Kendrick has in store for the next one. The day was March 15th, 2015. I slid out of bed and shuffled over to the window where I opened the curtain and looked out into the bright Sunday morning sky shining over my rural abode, which humbly stood aside a newly blooming cornfield. After a weekend of sweet, nectarous procrastination, I finally started to hack away at my algebra homework in preparation for the coming school week, blissfully unaware of the nuclear event that had just occurred, whose radioactive fallout would change hip-hop forever onward. To Pimp a Butterfly. Okay, perhaps I'm slightly overestimating this album's influence, but this seems to be the general sentiment that I've gleaned from the hip-hop community's attitude toward this project, and besides, being dramatic is one of my favorite pastimes. This record is an ambitious, conceptually dense exploration of the societal paradigm of racial discrimination through the lens of both politics and culture, largely inspired by his trip to South Africa the year prior. Often abbreviated by the fandom to TPAB, To Pimp a Butterfly is Kendrick's magnum opus when it comes to the intellectual presentation of themes. The album opens with a distant, looming refrain that slowly fades in. However, this joyous, hopeful mantra doesn't last, for it soon morphs into an ominous harmonic minor beat that slaps the listener in the face and declares the identity of the first track. Wesley's Theory. Straight out of the gate, you're immediately greeted with a rich and full sound created by this record's meaty production, which starkly separates it from the sonic profile of the previous 2 albums by exuding a much darker tone. Kendrick sets the stage by delivering a duo of verses surrounding institutional exploitation in America and allowing us to take our first steps into the caterpillar. The interlude that follows with the title For Free fittingly incorporates the genre free jazz with its rhythmic hysteria and spastic cymbal work. The cymbals aren't the only only thing that's spastic, by the way. This dick ain't free. I do love his delivery of these lines, though. He really tightens up his throat to make his voice sound extra urgent, and it made me realize that he's come a long way as a vocalist ever since the boring, lethargic delivery that plagued his early material. The next song, King Kunta, has an excellent beat with a great groove, and it also introduces the poem that serves as the thematic landscape of the album as a whole. I remember you as conflicted, misusing your influence. Sometimes I did the same, abusing my power, full of resentment that turned into a deep depression. Found myself screaming in the hotel room. I didn't want to self-destruct. The evils of Lucy was all around me, so I went running for answers until I came home. But that didn't stop survivor's guilt, going back and forth trying to convince myself the stripes I earned, or maybe how A1 my foundation was. But while my loved ones was fighting the continuous war back in the city, I was entering a new one, a war that was based on apartheid and discrimination. Made me want to go back to the city and tell the homies what I learned. The word was respect. Just because you wore a different gang color than mine doesn't mean I can't respect you as a black man, forgetting all the pain and hurt we caused each other in these streets. If I respect you, we unify and stop the enemy from killing us. But I don't know. I'm no mortal man. Maybe I'm just another guy. Now, there are a couple of interesting things about this poem. First of all, it doesn't rhyme. Lame. Second of all, it actually makes an appearance in 6 different tracks, but he never actually finishes it until the final song. It's broken up into separate segments across the album, and the fragments are finally united in the 16th track, Mortal Man. The poem is a very insightful account of Kendrick's newfound perspective after struggling with survival's guilt and the responsibilities spawned from his influence, and it's admittedly an effective device to maintain the topical through line of the record. Oh, and Lucy means Lucifer, by the way. You know, the drums sound nice and beefy so far. It would be a shame if we eventually just reverted back to trap beats after this great 4-track run of percussion. It'd be a real shame. Well, at least the slidey background synths in These Walls are fun. The song You acts as a notable catharsis in Kendrick's battle with survival's guilt, as reinforced by his intentionally unpleasant vocal delivery. It's a great idea for a song, given how much of an artistic statement it makes, and although I've come across some people during my research that outright hate this track because of Kendrick's performance on it, I actually think he executes it really well, and the rhythmic ambiguity of the beat is honestly way more frustrating than his voice is. Also, the lyrics call back to the previous track with the line about if mirrors could talk, and the line Lovin' Me is complicated in the next song, Alright, is a callback to this track. It's nice to see that level of foresight and awareness in the name of making this album more of an integrated experience. Speaking of Alright, there's even more rhythmic ambiguity here than in the last song. Like seriously, how does he know when to rap? I gotta say though, the backup vocals and horns are doing some pretty sophisticated lines. The interlude that follows has a sick a cappella intro, and whenever the bass comes in, whoo-wee, you can count on that thing being busy as a beaver. Alright, let me just delete that line from the script. Oh, damn it. How am I going to wipe it from the SD card without stopping the recording? Okay. Anyway. The little horn interjections in this song are so cute that I just want to pinch their little cheeks. I really need to proofread these scripts. Oh, hey, we're halfway through the album. Alright, seriously, what is up with the percussion on some of these songs? They sound like somebody's putting skillets in the dishwasher on the 9th track. Hey, Derek! Rinse them off first, pal. Well, I can't be too mad, because Kendrick's flow at the end of the song is 150cc, dude. The beat at the beginning of Hood Politics is a groove and a half, and the chord progression on How Much a Dollar Cost uses mixture like nobody's business. And it's really cool how the song makes you think that the vocals are on the downbeat, but then you realize that they're actually on the upbeat when the drums come in and recontextualize the whole situation. The song Complexion has a really satisfying beat with a full and healthy sounding rhythm section, and The Blacker the Berry makes for a perfect contrast with its aggressive vocal delivery. The line where he says I'm black as the moon is also a clever way of accentuating the intentional hypocrisy of these two tracks, since the moon goes through phases and therefore only appears partially black. I'd also like to point out the 6/8 time signature at the end of the song, because that just doesn't happen a lot. I just think it's cool. The penultimate track, I, has probably the most consistently good instrumentals of the album. The beat is nice and dynamic, and it feels less hollow than some of its predecessors. The previously discussed final track, Mortal Man, turns into a straight up TED Talk halfway through where he edits himself into a Tupac interview and pretends that he's the interviewer. Don't get me wrong, the whole metaphor with the caterpillar and the butterfly is brilliant, but oh boy, that just caught me off guard. So, what's the verdict? I can tell you right now that this is an above average Kendrick Lamar album. I would say that I respect it more than any other project in his catalog just because of the intellectual ambition that went into it. After all, I wrote more pages of notes about this record than any of the others for this review. However, as I mentioned in my M.A.A.d review, I tend to focus on the music more than the lyrics, and simply put, this album is not as sonically satisfying as Section 80. With that being said, I would venture to say that To Pimp a Butterfly is substantially more artistic than any other album in the discography. I'm going to give the Flow Trophy to The Blacker the Berry, but I is a close second. The bar of the album for me comes from the 10th track, Hood Politics. Oh yeah? Puto want to squabble with me barrio? Oh yeah? Tell them they can run it for the cardio. Good stuff. But hey, make sure never to let go of those butterflies in your stomach, kid. If you lose your edge, this mad city might just pimp you out. Hey, we're already 4 albums into this thing. Damn. No, that's the name of Kendrick's 4th album. It's called Damn. So this record explores various abstract concepts with each of its tracks. Every song is a representative vignette of a certain idea, whether that be a physical phenomenon, an emotion, a virtue, or one of the classic deadly sins. There are a total of 14 tracks on this album, each of which having a single word title. Out of these 14 words, 10 of them are nouns, 1 of them is an interjection, 1 of them is a verb, and 2 of them are adjectives. Now you may be wondering why I took the time to compile this data, and it's because I'm a naughty little grammar slut who needs to be punished, but the information's in your hands now, so you can't do anything about it. So the first song is fun. It's a good song. I like the first song is fun. Kendrick loves his a cappella intros, and this song, not to mention the 7th track, Pride, is no exception to that. They're doing some nice minor 7 voicings followed by a theatrical suspension on the dominant. And as always, the bass part is based. Kendrick's delivery on this has a ghostly quality to it that fits well with the lyrical content, which is a very poignant allegorical scenario that I can only assume is a figurative statement about police brutality. However, the vocal delivery on the following track, DNA, takes on a much more emphatic style, equipped with a simple yet effective flow scheme. Interestingly enough, the 3rd track, Ya, features a vocal melody that outlines a 13 chord, and it's not just an add 6. The other extension tones are very much present in the arrangement. Also, you guys can let me know if I'm just seeing things at this point, but I think there's a super subtle double entendre in the 4th track Element. The line goes like this: DOT my enemy, won't catch a vibe for it. I've been stomped out in front of my mama, my daddy commissary made it to commas. You have the surface level meaning, but I think there might be a hidden scheme surrounding punctuation. My daddy commissary made it to commas, and DOT spells out dot, which is another word for a period. I respect Kendrick's experimentation with his voice during the 6th track, Loyalty. It sounds like he's opening his mouth really wide and speaking entirely through his nose. You can also see the level of programmatic insight continue when he says it's hard to be humble, which leads into the next song, Pride, and then the next song after that, which is Humble. I think Pride, along with the 14th track, Duckworth, are the 2 best songs on the album when it comes to lyricism. These are a group of seriously clever verses. I'm sorry, but I really hate the beat on Humble. Did he just rhyme Photoshop with Richard Pryor? I have to say that Kendrick illustrates the guilty pleasures in the song Lust super well. I can picture exactly what he's rapping about. The line where he talks about his favorite vein is also really cool, and the instrumentals certainly aren't slacking either. The reverse cymbals are an interesting effect, and I love the strings in the 2nd verse. The arrangement of the next track, Love, is very full, and I can't get enough of Zakari's melody, which lands on the 4th scale degree really gracefully. Apparently the 11th track, which is spelled XXX, is actually pronounced X-rated, for whatever that's worth, but the song actually starts out in the same key as the last one and then modulates to minor, which makes for a good vibe transition. I'm not a big fan of the beat that it goes into, but the one in part 2 is nice and smooth, and Kendrick's voice also reflects this change by starting out really lethargic and then becoming more emphatic in the 2nd half. I interpreted the backward speech in the next track, Fear, as a sort of double meaning in that he's rewinding the tape back to his childhood, but there are also undertones of demonic activity because it sounds like he's speaking in tongues. I mentioned earlier that the final track, Duckworth, has some amazing lyrics, but there are also some jazzy backup vocals that fill out the song perfectly. And once again, Kendrick rewinds the tape so that you can loop back to the beginning and start the whole album all over again. Overall, this record is definitely not among my favorites in his catalog. I think Kendrick himself gave a better performance in terms of delivery and wordplay than his previous projects, but the instrumentals and beats are such a step down that it severely cripples the album's quality and relativity to its predecessors. I'm going to give the Flow Trophy to Duckworth, and and the bar of the album is actually an entire stanza from the 5th track, Feel. I feel heartless, off and off this feeling of fallen apart with darkest hours, lost and filling the void of being employed with ballin' streets is talking, fill in the blanks with coffins, fill up the banks with dollars, fill up the graves with fathers, fill up the babies with bullshit internet blogs and pulpit, fill them with gossip. Damn, what a sizzling batch of bars. Kendrick. What? Congratulations, you have my attention. What's your angle, man? You know what this is about. I am not going to therapy! Come on, you won't even give it an honest try? No, because you know why? They're just gonna tell me crap about myself that I already know. Yes, but they'll also teach you how to work on those things. I already know how to work on it. I've been working on it for years. Yeah, and why do you think it's taking so long? Because it's my own process, man. I can take care of myself. And how's that been going so far? Look, I'm not trying to rub salt in the wound. I just think therapy might set you on the right path. Fine, I'll go. You will? But only if I can get an album out of it. Oh my god. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is the most recent entry in the Kendrick Lamar catalog. It came out in 2022, 5 years after Damn dropped in 2017, marking the longest amount of time between album releases in his discography. This record tells the story of Kendrick's experiences during therapy, sporting 18 tracks in total, which is more than any other album before it. But before I sink my teeth into this thing, I wanted to point out the mode of presentation that Kendrick's going for here. And also, for every other album by extension. I didn't notice this until I got to Mr. Morale, but it turns out that every Kendrick Lamar album is presented in such a way that emulates a different style of media. Section 80 is a book because of the chapter numbers in the track listing. Good Kid, Mad City is a film because, well, it says so on the album cover, but it's also just cinematic by nature. To Pimp a Butterfly is a poem because of the poetic excerpt that's sequentially constructed throughout it. And Damn is a magazine because of the all-caps titles of each song acting as headlines and the art style resembling the cover logo of Time. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers is a play. Not only is it a generally theatrical record inherently, but the sides are explicitly called Act 1 and Act 2. This really elevated my appreciation for Kendrick's artistic integrity because I was aware that each individual album had lots of inter-track connections, but to step back and see this level of integration on a macro level of the entire catalog was really eye-opening. Anyway, let's talk about some of these tracks, shall we? The album opener is a song called United in Grief, which is separated into 2 parts. The first part has some pretty neat piano stabs, but the second part features this frenetic drum pattern that doesn't really fit with the vibe. The suspended synth arpeggios are cool though. The tasteful synth work continues with the following track N95, but Kendrick just settles into the triplet flow that I'm kind of sick and tired of at this point, if I can be frank. We get the return of his signature voice cracking in the 3rd verse though, which I always found to be quite enjoyable for whatever reason. The beat in the 4th track, Die Hard, is super minimalistic, but the groove admittedly grew on me, and Amanda Reifer's melody is awesome. The next track, Father Time, begins with an ethereal instrumental intro, and it has some pretty good, albeit on-the-nose lyrics. The speeding up piano lines in the following interlude seem like something I would do on the piano as a kid, just experimenting with open 5th intervals, but it does eventually develop into some decently tasty jazz arpeggios. I really didn't enjoy the song Rich Spirit, to be honest. It uses snaps in place of the snare drum, which is a long-standing music pet peeve of mine, and it doesn't help that Kendrick's delivery is so lethargic that it sounds like he might just slip into unconsciousness. However, I actually did like We Cry Together, funny enough. It sort of reminded me of Kim by Eminem, and even though it's not quite as impactful, it is a cleverly constructed piece of emotional catharsis. The chord progression only consists of 2 chords, but they're very interesting chords, with a few unintuitive extensions that never really resolve. It does a great job of maintaining the tension. I genuinely adore the beat on the 9th track, Purple Hearts, and Ghostface Killah absolutely slaughtered his verse. It's actually ridiculous how much he overshadowed Kendrick. The second act opens with Count Me Out, which has a trap beat. And I know I said I wouldn't mention this anymore, but the cicada-like percussion is especially grating on this track. I do appreciate the vocal escalation near the end of the song, though. Much like the interlude in Act 1, the 11th track, Crown, features a painfully simple piano pattern, but it is eventually fleshed out with added harmony later on. I encourage everyone to listen to the chorus of Silent Hill immediately after this video because it is positively hilarious. The interlude to Savior features some neat string punches, but the song Savior itself has a really strange beat. The track redeems itself with the great lyrics in the third verse, though. I love the swelling strings at the end of Auntie Diaries, and the lyrics are incredible on this track too. The title track, Mr. Morale, has this muted beat that complements the breathy intro quite well, and the backup vocals are pretty cool. The escalating vocal delivery during the last verse of Mother Ice Sober is epic. It really drives home the solemnity of the song. And the last track, Mirror, has a pretty catchy chord progression. The strings and synthesizers work symbiotically in this song, and for the entire album for that matter. This record is an impressive feat of lyricism, if nothing else, and I did really enjoy the level of personal reflection going into these verses. However, I found the instrumentation and arranging to be painfully minimalistic, which is definitely not my style in the slightest. I didn't particularly like Kendrick's flow on this project, so I'm just gonna give the flow trophy to Purple Hearts for Ghostface Killah's performance alone. The bar of the album comes from the final track, Mirror. Sorry I didn't save the world, my friend. I was too busy building mine again. I think that bar is a nice encapsulation of what it means to go to therapy and work on yourself, prioritizing self-love over other people's needs. It's a powerful sentiment that I think we could all stand to follow in our own lives. Alright everybody, that was all 5 Kendrick Lamar albums. I'm really glad that I could experience a different generation of hip-hop this time around, and I'm certainly continuing to understand more and more about why people love this genre of music so much. The rap format is remarkably conducive of storytelling and intellectual lyricism at a high level, and Kendrick Lamar represents that superior capacity quite extensively. When it comes to thematic integration, intellectual wordplay, and vivid storytelling, I can tell that Kendrick Lamar is undeniably top of the line. However, as much as it disappoints me to say, I've realized that his music is just not for me. I've listened to all 5 of these albums twice all the way through now, and unfortunately the instrumental composition almost never appeals to my taste, and even when it does, I find Kendrick's flow patterns to be rather static and uninteresting. Notwithstanding these gripes, I do want to make it clear that I acknowledge and respect his competency as an artist. It's just not the kind of thing that I'd personally want to seek out musically. So, now's your chance to tell me why I'm wrong in the comment section. I always love to hear people's insights about art, and I can't wait to continue my journey into hip-hop. Goodbye for now. Oh yeah, and Kendrick won the beef. It wasn't close.